Avery set the tone offensively, but he's always great defensively for the most part. And when he gets going, it opens up everything else. 'Cause he flies off those screens 100 miles per hour, and somewhat keeps the other team on their heels. So that's the biggest thing. That's cool.
Welcome to part two. First, we go to the Grandstand play of the game. Grandstand for fans in the stands. On the Grandstand app, you can see all the best views of the Garden and of any sport that you want to see in North America on the Grandstand app with amazing videos from the fans. So let's take a look at the play here, and you can download Grandstand at grandstand.me or in the App Store. Avery Bradley doing it up and one style, doing his best Allen Iverson impression, actually getting to the rim, not really Avery Bradley's style. And Avery Bradley is a unique player. He is this incredibly aggressive, intense player, but incredibly introverted, very quiet, very humble. What do you look at when you see his personality?
Well, he stood out right away. I remember in the draft, this was years before we had done the type of research that we do now, but just reading his individual profile, he was a player that was pretty high. I think we had him top 7 or top 10 just from a profile standpoint, not saying from a player standpoint, but having the attributes. Now going back and retroactively doing the research and seeing how guys rate out in our system, he's right in between the top and the high mid categories, which what that means basically is the top level guys have the most flexibility. I would say they have the highest survival rate. We define that by the percentage of players that are drafted relative to the percentage of players that stick in a consistent role in the league after 4 years. The matriculation level, they're also the most consistent performers from college to the pros, which I know Avery playing 1 year and having kind of a dip is counterintuitive, but that's the key to looking at groups of players relative to looking at a player in isolation. Is when you're trying to gauge a player that you might not have a lot of experience with, using that comp, using a more of a behavioral or personality profile based comp is good. And Avery has got a great mix of characteristics. He is quiet, and that self-doubt that you might have seen a little bit more early on, maybe considering how good a shooter he is now and how confident he looks. Remember when the word on him was Avery can't shoot, because he was in fact missing tons of shots. I always believed that the fundamentals and the form and the work ethic would overcome, and I always believed that was more a byproduct of being a little bit more anxious and a little more self-doubting, and also being in the presence of a ton of Hall of Famers early on, where the pressure relative to the experience is much higher. And as you can see, as he's gotten more experience and more tenure and he's become the senior most member of this team, that's clearly not an issue anymore. So, I think he's the kind of player where you really want to trust in the numbers and then back that up with your observation. Great kid, works hard, looks like he should be good. And if I'm going to bet anybody long-term and reinvest and double down with a long-term deal, which is a great value, whether or not he thinks it is or not, he's the player that I sign up for and bet on continuing to evolve over the course of that deal.
All right, well, he's already kind of gotten kind of towards his prime at this point. Marcus Smart is still incredibly young, and people are still trying to I think there's a frustration with the lack of growth right now, but he's been dealing with long injury layoffs consistently throughout his career, so we're still waiting to see significant offensive development. But what do you see in his profile, and what kind of range does he have for offensive growth?
It's hard to say. I don't want to get too much. I know a lot of people have different opinions from a scouting standpoint. I think that from what I've heard, I do have the benefit of talking to multiple teams' scouts about players, so I feel like my perspective is at least well-rounded, if not accurate, because it comes directly from sources that are paid to know this. And I don't know if he was ever considered to be, certainly not a quick-hitting offensive player. I think that was the side of his game that was always going to take the longest to develop. From a team fit standpoint, I think having, let's be honest, like Evan Turner is more evolved, and he's more developed as a pick and roll player. The numbers, bear that out. So there was going to, for a team that's putting an emphasis on winning, there's some of that is by design and by role. And then from a profile standpoint, when you see a play, this is why defining terms is so important, is when you see a player that's that aggressive defensively, you have a natural tendency to believe that person has a dominant personality. But at least from the numbers and where he kind of comps out to in his group, he's not a naturally control-oriented player. He's more, he's more defensive-minded. He has some anxiety as well, which actually, by the way, is indicative of a lot of excellent defenders. Tend to be more emotionally driven, tend to have more self-doubt, things that might make a little more sense. When you're self-confident and you don't believe anything's going to go wrong, there's a tendency to have a lack of sense of urgency. If you're more reactive, if you're more self-doubting, you make more decisions based off emotion, you can tend to be caught up in situations that are that's at least my hypothesis, and it seems to be consistent. So offensively, I think it's a combination of things. You're not talking about a player that came in with a lot of offensive polish to begin with. You have a player that's playing a role where he's been taking a back seat, and you're seeing this change now. They're doing more pick and roll with him, and even though he's not as consistently good at it as Evan Turner, the opportunity to do that is creating more. And then that, in turn, by empowering a player that's not naturally looking to take shots and Evan Turner, definitely not a passive player. He's aggressive. You don't need to tell him. I call it push-pull. Some guys need to, you need to pull back and hold back, and some guys you need to push forward a little bit. So I think that's kind of Marcus, and I think that as he continues to get put in situations where he can attack the basket and use that to play off of his three-point shot, I think you'll see progression, steady.
So does that anxiety that's a real tool for him defensively, does that hurt him offensively because it makes it more difficult for him to kind of attack the opportunities that are more difficult to really obtain, like trying to really create gaps in the defense rather than attacking the open gaps in the defense?
I think, historically the most successful players tend to have a nice balance. You're not so self-doubting that it's crippling for your decision-making, but you're not so self-confident that you don't review your own decisions and you tend not to think about what you're doing as much. I have
not to pick on someone specifically.
I have no knowledge of that. But I think that it's situation dependent. There's players that are successful on all levels. It really matters what your skill is, what you're confident doing already coming in, what you're empowered to do, like I said, and then the leeway that you're given to make mistakes as you explore your game. Those are all factors. I don't think it's just a static personality characteristic that leads to success or failure. It's the way that those characteristics are engaged with in the environment you're asked to play in and the role you're asked to play in that environment.
All right, very quickly here, the unicorn of the Celtics locker room, Kelly Olynyk, the man bun. He's been kind of his game and his career has really transformed over the last month, and he's always been a player that we would think would be effective if he just would hit his goddamn 3-point shots, and now he's hitting them. And he's been really effective. And tonight was a great example. He played 17 minutes and had 17 points. And just the way that he can stretch out fives defensively opens up everything for the team. And all the things that seem to be flaws in the casual viewer's eye of that, his apprehension with the ball on the perimeter, stuff like that, now it's being appreciated as patience and observation and feel.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, we have a piece coming out actually comparing him to Boris Diaw, and you'd be surprised at how many similarities there are there between those two. It's my favorite comparison. I've loved it forever.
Hopefully not conditioning, at least.
No. Clearly, Kelly's worked on his body a ton. He's done everything. But low mids tend to have the most discrepancy in success between the quality of the difference in the quality of the team, meaning that their performance level is much higher, their level of engagement is much higher when they're in winning environments versus when they're in losing environments, and also structurally. So this team has won, and he has been a part of a team that's had moderate levels of success, but the role certainty, and we were talking about this before the cameras were rolling, but one of the biggest things about that group is that general level of flexibility, and that they're non-dominant. They have not introverted, but Kelly's quiet, but then he says funny things. But he's not one of these large personalities that needs to take over him. Not huge risk-taking, kind of lively, engaging, take over the room type of person, and a lot of stuff going on internally, right? And so that ability to see somebody not resist being used as kind of a jack of all trades. We can put him here, we can put him there, we can use him short miss, we use long miss. There's a huge, kind of draw you can see from a coaching standpoint with a guy that has that skill set and that versatility, and say, okay, we can put him in all these different positions. but empowering, again, using that same concept, players that aren't naturally dominant, that tend to be very analytical, to tend to, to be more passive and more, kind of withdrawn, streamlining things. I don't think it's a surprise that as this team has kind of found its identity offensively, that he has started to rise up the way that he has the last few games. And also that happened actually the beginning of December. The 2 hot streaks for Avery Bradley and KO have coincided with 2 hot streaks for this team. I don't think that's surprising. Both of them need to play well for the team to do well, but I think that, at least in Kelly's case, playing well goes hand in hand with having a little bit more certainty. We talked about this preseason. Team Canada, why was he so effective offensively for that? That was his job. It wasn't, hey, we want you to shoot it when you're open. It was, your job is to be a scorer on this team. And knowing that that's, having that kind of certainty, knowing that it's his level of responsibility, I think for him or for players of that nature, and it shows out in the data, the comps, they do better when they know specifically what their role is. And that role is not just shooting, but it's more like, you need to do X in order for us to, to be successful. And I think that that's real in his work. Of course, you see him in the pregame. I mean, he gets up a couple hundred shots
everywhere,
and he works
every
it.
type of drive he can,
and not stupid shots. You see a lot of guys warm up and they're just fooling around. I mean, he puts in work. He takes his curls. He catches and shoots at the pace that he would do it in a game. And that's, I think, you practice like you play. That's from Coach David Thorpe. Thank you, Coach Thorpe. Practice like you play, right?
Yeah.
That's the key, I think, and he does that. So I'm not surprised that he's starting to evolve.
All right, well, that was fun. We got really in depth there. That was great. Thanks to everyone that held on for that entire ride, because that was pretty wild. So we got to get out of here. For Eric Weiss, I'm Jared Weiss. This was the Garden Report, powered by Grandstand on CLNS Radio and Celtics Blog. Friday night's game, I will not be here. We'll have Corey Prescott in my stead, but definitely tune into that one because Kevin O'Connor will be on that show as well. So that's going to do it for us tonight. Peace out.
Nice.